The belated dawn of the Swallow, how the fragile genius of the Third Reich forever changed the sky, but could not change the course of the war. Imagine the sky over Germany in the middle of 1944. The armada of Allied bombers drones ominously. Flying Fortress B-17s, formed into formidable combat boxes, sail inexorably towards their targets. They are escorted by waspish, agile P-51 Mustang fighters, the pride of the American Air Force. For the German pilots in their piston-engine Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf FW-190s, this sight had become a familiar vision of hell. They fought desperately, but they knew superiority in speed and altitude was no longer on their side. The air war was being lost, slowly but surely. And then, on this seemingly predetermined day, something unimaginable happened. From German airfields, aircraft rose into the sky whose appearance fit no known catalog of Allied pilots. Long, sleek fuselages, no propeller, and in its place, two pod-like engines under the wings. And most importantly, the sound. Not the familiar wailing roar of piston engines, but a growing, deafening, almost alien howl. It was the roar of jet engines. The roar of a future that had arrived several years earlier than expected. These silver ghosts, nicknamed Swallows, Schwalbe, shot past the bomber formations at speeds that seemed fantastic. The Mustangs, whose pilots screamed in disbelief into their headphones, helplessly tried to turn for an attack, but their piston hearts were incapable of catching these demons of speed. A short, furious burst from four 30mm cannons, and another B-17 turned into a fireball, torn apart from within. It seemed like the turning point had come. The wonder weapon, the Wunderwaffe, that the Führer had promised his people. A weapon capable of clearing Germany's sky of the enemy scourge in one stroke. But then why haven't you read about how squadrons of Me-262s stopped the air raids and changed the course of the war? Why did this aircraft not become the savior of the Third Reich? Because the story of the Me-262 is not a story of triumph. It is one of the most tragic, multifaceted, and instructive sagas in the history of aviation. It is the story of brilliant engineers who were ahead of their time, of a short-lived fury in the sky that stunned the enemy. But it is also the story of fatal errors, insane orders, an economy cracking at the seams, and a war of attrition that ultimately grinded down even the most advanced weapon. It is the story of how a technological breakthrough, devoid of competent strategy, competent production, and ultimately common sense, is doomed to become merely an expensive and beautiful toy, a belated harbinger of a new era that no longer belonged to its creators. Today, we will not simply list specifications and dates. We will immerse ourselves in this story completely. We will understand why the Me-262 is both awe-inspiring and pitiable. Why it was late for the war, but managed to open the jet age for all mankind. Fasten your seatbelts. We're taking off. Birth of a Ghost. Engineering genius in the shadow of madness. To understand the phenomenon of the Me-262, one must mentally transport themselves to Germany in the late 1930s. The Nazi regime was already preparing extensively for war, but in scientific and technical circles, an atmosphere of incredible uplift prevailed. This was the country that had given the world Heisenberg, Einstein, by then already exiled, and von Braun. German engineers thought in terms of the day after tomorrow. While the entire world was perfecting piston-engine aircraft, making them slightly faster, slightly more maneuverable, in the minds of designers at the Messerschmitt Company, a concept was being born that was meant to negate all existing cannons. The idea was simple and brilliant. Remove the propeller. The propeller and piston engine, which had reached their ceiling by that time, were the main limiters of speed. They were to be replaced by jet engines, using the principle of mass reaction. Turbojet engines, TJ. Work on a project, designated P.1065, began in deep secrecy as early as 1938. The chief ideologist and father of the aircraft was the legendary designer Willy Messerschmitt. And the heart of the future fighter, the Jumo 204 engine, was being created under the guidance of another genius, Dr. Anselm Franz of Junkers. Imagine the courage of these people. They were heading in a completely unknown direction. Problems arose at every step. The first problem, the engine. The first TG prototypes were unreliable, capricious monsters. Their service life was measured in literally a few hours. The materials from which the turbine blades were made could not withstand the monstrous temperatures and centrifugal loads. There was a shortage of heat-resistant steels, alloyed with nickel and molybdenum, strategic materials that Germany lacked. Franz's engineers had to resort to a clever trick. They created hollow blades, cooled by air, which was a revolutionary solution for the time. But even this did not save them. The service life of the serial Jumo 204B at the end of the war rarely exceeded 25 hours. Imagine, the most complex apparatus, a product of the highest engineering, operated in total for 1 day and was sent for scrap or remelting. The second problem, aerodynamics. The shape of the aircraft, which seems classic to us today, was a radical breakthrough then. A long, streamlined fuselage, a wing with moderate sweep, 18.5 degrees. All this was not just for beauty. This shape minimized drag at near-sonic speeds. The Me-262 in a dive could approach the sound barrier, causing incomprehensible and terrifying phenomena. Shaking, jamming of controls. Test pilots were not just pilots. They were kamikazes of science, exploring the unknown. The first flight of the prototype, still with a piston engine, took place on April 18, 1941. And its first flight on jet thrust was on July 18, 1942. But serial production was still a long way off. The German command, confident in a swift victory, did not see an acute need for this wonder weapon. Funding was cut. The project was given secondary attention. While Germany was winning, its leadership did not want to take risks. When it began to lose, it turned out there was no time left for fine-tuning. This is the first bitter paradox of the Me-262's fate. Economy and war. Why genius could not take off. Here we must pause and look at the bigger picture. An airplane is not just drawings and engineering calculations. It is also economics. And the economy of the Third Reich by 1944 was a pitiful sight. Germany was fighting a war on two fronts against a coalition whose combined industrial potential far surpassed its own. American factories, inaccessible to bombing, operated in 3 shifts, producing thousands of tanks, aircraft, and ships. The Soviet Union, having evacuated its industry to the Urals, was increasing the output of simple but effective equipment at a monstrous pace. And Germany? Its cities lay in ruins after Anglo-American air raids. The railway system was paralyzed. Factories producing components for the Me-262 were bombed. Assembly was carried out in semi-underground hangars scattered throughout the forests by the hands of hungry workers and prisoners of war whose labor was inefficient. The fuel famine. This is a separate, key drama. The Me-262 was not just fast. It was voracious. One of its sorties consumed about 2,500 liters of special synthetic fuel J2, a mixture of diesel fuel and benzene. For comparison, a piston engine FW190 consumed about 600 liters of gasoline per sortie on average. It turns out that one sortie of the Jet 262, in terms of fuel cost, was equal to 4 sorties of a conventional fighter. And by the end of the war, Germany had neither oil nor refineries. Allied bombings deliberately destroyed synthetic fuel plants. By March 1945, the Luftwaffe was receiving less than 10% of the required volume of fuel. Aircraft stood on airfields without fuel. Pilots, having undergone accelerated training, forgot what it was like to fly. Brilliant machines turned into useless heaps of metal. You can create the fastest plane in the world, but if it has nothing to run on, it is merely a very expensive monument on the ground. The personnel famine. Training a pilot for the Me-262 was an extremely difficult task. Retraining a pilot accustomed to piston engine machines for jet technology was not just a matter of giving him new instructions. It was about changing his mindset. The speeds were different, the maneuverability was different. Landing a jet aircraft, especially with capricious engines, was akin to an art. Germany had no time. Young men were conscripted, given a few dozen hours of flight time on training aircraft, and thrown into battle on the most complex machines of their time. The result was predictable: numerous accidents, non-combat losses. An experienced ace who had been through the entire war could handle the Swallow. But there were only a handful of such aces left. General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's best pilots, who commanded the JV-44 squadron equipped with Me-262s at the end of the war, bitterly stated, "We lost more machines due to engine failures than to enemy bullets." Imagine this absurdity. A pilot, having taken off in a unique apparatus, had to fight not only Mustangs but also his own engines, which could stall, catch fire, or explode at any moment. It was a lottery where the stake was life. The fatal mistake: the Führer's insane order. If the enemies of the Swallow were only on the ground in the form of logistics and economics, and in the sky in the form of the Allies, perhaps the story would have been different. But the aircraft had one more, perhaps the main enemy, and he was sitting in a bunker under Berlin. Adolf Hitler, increasingly detached from reality, upon learning of the new high-speed aircraft, was delighted. But his delight had a specific direction. The Führer, obsessed with the idea of retaliation, Virgil Tongue, saw in the Me-262 not a fighter for gaining air superiority, but a high-speed bomber. Yes, you heard right. The most advanced fighter of its time, created to destroy bombers, was, by order from above, converted into an attack aircraft. The modification Me-262A2, a Sturmvogel, Storm Petrel, appeared. It could carry 2 bombs of 250 kilograms each. You might think, what's the difference? The difference was colossal. Suspended bombs drastically increased drag and the aircraft's mass. Its main advantage, speed, dropped by 40 to 50%. The Swallow, turned into a bomb carrier, became vulnerable to the very P-51 Mustangs from which it was supposed to be invulnerable. Moreover, aiming for bombing at such speeds was an extremely difficult task. The effectiveness of the Sturmvogel as a bomber proved to be close to zero. Engineers and pilots protested in horror. Galland personally tried to prove to Hitler that this was madness. But the Führer was adamant. He wanted lightning strikes on ground targets. He wanted revenge. As a result, precious months, when the Me-262 could have been mass-produced for air defense units and begun systematically clearing the sky of bombers, were wasted on redesigning and testing in an unnatural role. Only at the end of 1944, after more than 120 machines had been irretrievably lost in useless missions, was the insane idea canceled. But the time was irretrievably lost. This episode is the clearest illustration of how political madness and amateurism in strategic matters can bury even the most brilliant technological breakthrough. The Swallow, in battle, fury, and agony. Despite everything, when the Me-262s did enter battle in their primary role as interceptor fighters, they sowed genuine horror among the Allies and demonstrated devastating effectiveness. Here is just one illustrative episode. On March 18, 1945, 37 Me-262s from the JG-7 squadron attacked a huge formation of bombers. The tactics were honed to perfection. The Swallows approached from the rear from above, using their speed superiority. They dived at an angle of 40 to 50 degrees, reaching speeds of nearly 900 kilometers per hour. Their weapon, 4 30mm Mk-108 cannons, was as terrifying as the aircraft itself. These guns were grimly nicknamed hammers by the Allies. Their shells weighed about 540 grams and were filled with powerful explosives. To destroy a huge B-17 or B-24, an average of only 3 to 4 hits were required. A shell exploding inside the fuselage would cause the ammunition and fuel to detonate, literally tearing the aircraft apart. This was not shooting, it was a massacre. In that battle on March 18th, the Germans, according to various sources, shot down 25 flying fortresses, losing only 4 of their own fighters. The Allies were shocked. Their tactics, hard-won over years of war, proved useless against flocks of these jet arrows. But the Swallow had its Achilles heels, which Allied pilots quickly learned to exploit. First weakness: low maneuverability in turns. At high speed, the Me-262 was king. But in a horizontal maneuvering dogfight, it lost to lighter piston engine fighters like the Soviet Yak-3 or the British Spitfire. Its turn radius reached almost 2,000 meters. Trying to get on the tail of a Swallow, a Mustang pilot was doomed. But if he forced the German into a turning fight, the advantage passed to the American. Second weakness: vulnerability during takeoff and landing. This was the main tactical trap. The Jumo 204 engines had monstrous inertia. When the throttle was advanced sharply, they could stall. And when reducing RPM for landing, the aircraft quickly lost speed. In those few minutes when the Me-262 was on its final approach with landing gear and flaps extended, its speed dropped to 300 kilometers per hour. It turned into a slow, clumsy sitting duck. American pilots quickly realized that there was no point in trying to catch the Swallow in the sky. It was much easier to ambush it over its own airfield. The free hunt tactic brought the Allies dozens of downed jet fighters that hadn't even had time to gain altitude. Thus, the picture in the sky began to resemble agony. A handful of German aces and their swift but fragile machines inflicted painful losses on the enemy, but could not stop the armadas that came day after day. Every downed B-17 was a tactical victory, but strategically, the war was already lost. The Me-262 became a symbol of the fury of the doomed. The legacy of the Swallow: how the German ghost gifted the world the jet age. When a war in Europe ended in May 1945, the Allies rushed to the surviving German factories and research centers. They were interested not so much in gold reserves as in intellectual trophies, blueprints, prototypes, scientists. And the Me-262 became one of the main such trophies. This is where perhaps the most important part of its story begins. The Me-262 was late for its war, but managed to open the door to a new era for all mankind. Its wreckage, scattered throughout Germany, became a ticket to the future for the world's aviation powers. The Soviet Union. Soviet engineers, arriving at the factories where the Me-262 was assembled, were amazed. They meticulously studied and copied everything: the airframe, engines, control systems. The Jumo 204 engine was reproduced under the name RD-10. Based on it, the first Soviet serial jet fighter, the Yak-15, was created. It was in essence the same Me-262, but with one engine and a straight wing from the piston engine Yak-3. Its first flight took place as early as April 1946. Almost simultaneously, the Me-G9 appeared, also using a pair of captured BMW 303 engines, Soviet designation RD-20. The Soviet approach was simple and pragmatic: copy and immediately put into series production. They took a ready-made, tested German design to close the gap as quickly as possible. However, they inherited all the teething troubles of the original: low engine life, fire hazard, complexity of control. The United States. The Americans approached the matter differently. They did not simply copy the aircraft. They took the creators themselves to the States, both the blueprints and, most importantly, Dr. Anselm Franz himself, the father of the Jumo 204 engine. American engineers meticulously studied the German developments, but did not blindly copy them. They took the best, the aerodynamic concept of the swept wing, and perfected it. The result of this synthesis was the famous F-86 Sabre, which appeared in 1947. It had a 35-degree swept wing, more advanced engines, descendants of the same Jumo, and powerful machine gun armament. It was the Sabre that would become the main opponent of the Soviet Me-G15 in the skies of Korea. The irony of fate. Essentially, two descendants of the Me-262 clashed in battle in the Korean sky, developing ideas born in Nazi Germany. Great Britain. We must not forget the British, who went their own way. Their jet fighter, the Gloucester Meteor, took to the skies even earlier than the Me-262. in March 1943. But it was more conservative, with a straight wing and inferior in performance to the German machine. However, the Meteor became the Allies' real combat jet aircraft, used to intercept V-1 flying bombs. Thus, the Me-262 became the catalyst that launched the jet arms race around the world. It showed the path that everyone followed. Each country saw its own lessons in its fate. For the USSR, the need to catch up with the West at any cost. For the USA, the importance of not only technology, but also competent production and pilot training. For all, the unconditional arrival of a new jet age. The lessons of the Swallow. Technology is powerless without a system. So what remains of the Me-262 for us? A beautiful legend? Yes. Admiration for the courage of the engineers and pilots? Undoubtedly. But most importantly, these are harsh, relevant lessons to this day. Technology is not a panacea. 1. Even the most advanced piece of weaponry cannot win a war if there is no system. A developed economy, reliable production, competent logistics, and personnel training. Strategy is more important than tactics. Tactically, the Me-262 was a formidable weapon, but strategically, its application was abysmal. Insane orders from above negated all its advantages. Genius in the service of madness is doomed to failure. War is economics. The fastest plane in the world is useless if it has nothing to fuel it, if there is nothing to assemble it from, if there is no one to pilot it. The battle in factory workshops and on oil fields turned out to be more important than the battle in the sky. Ideas are immortal. Despite the fact that the Me-262 project within the Third Reich suffered defeat, the ideas embedded in it turned out to be stronger. They outlived their creators, crossed oceans, and gave impetus to the development of aviation for decades to come. The Me-262 is a tragic, majestic, and instructive monument to human genius and human madness. It is a fragile swallow that, even shattering against the granite of reality, managed to trace its path in the sky, the path of a future that arrived for everyone except itself. So our journey into the past has come to an end. I sincerely hope that I was able to convey to you the range of feelings that this story evokes in me. Admiration, bitterness, respect. The story of the Me-262 proves that the past is not just dusty archives, they're living lessons. If this material hooked you, made you think about something, please support the channel, subscribe, and comment actively. Right? What do you think? Could the course of the war have really been changed if the Me-262 had appeared a year earlier? Or maybe you want me to analyze in detail another Wunderwaffe, for example, the V-2 or the first helicopters. Your opinion and your questions are the fuel for future releases. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.